Hi, welcome back to Office Hours.
Presented by Holderness and Bourne.
The subject of today's class is the United States Open Championship. Folks, it's officially official. Since 1895, in Newport, Rhode Island, the USGA has conducted an annual championship to determine the best golfer in the United States. It is an open championship. Anybody can play in it. For this year's event, almost 10,000 players have ponied up the $200 entry fee and have met the minimum requirement of a 1.4 USGA handicap index to play. So how do they decide who gets to play out of the 10,000? Well, we start with 9,693 golfers playing in 109 local qualifiers for 530 spots. You've got stud amateur golfers coming out of their college careers. You've got club pros. They've been busy hosting their members and their member guests and in their spare time almost trying to figure out a game. And then you've also got these mid-ams who are just dead money. They've got no chance of making it. They're clogging up the fields, but they also add a little comedic humor to the event. Okay, so 530 lucky souls out of those 9,693 are going to make it through local qualifying. Now, what does that get them? That gets them a ticket to play against tour pros, past champions, Euros, in the sectional events. So the sectional events are going to be 13 sectional events held all over the country. There's 10 of them in the United States. There's one in Canada, there's one in England, and there's one in Japan. 36-hole qualifiers. Some people call it the longest day of golf. Those 530 are going to compete for 103 spots in the US Open. Then those 103 players are going to be joined by 53 fully exempt players, either off of past champions, high performances in the other majors, or world ranking points. Boil it all down, you start with about 10,000 players and you end up with 156 folks playing for the national championship. The first US Open was held in 1895 in Newport, Rhode Island. Ironically, it was the Americans who got off to a slow start in the US Open. An American didn't win until the 17th playing, but since then they've won 86 of the past 106. In those first 16 Opens, 12 of them were won by Scotsmen, but no Scotsman has won a US Open since Willie McFarland won the last in 1925. Americans won every single US Open played between 1926 and 1965. In fact, Tony Jacklин's blowout win up at Hazeltine in 1970, that was the only victory by a golfer from Great Britain in the US Open between 1926 and 2010. So in recent years, the results have gotten much more diverse. Believe it or not, for this year's championship, Brooks Koepka will be the only player in the field who's won more than one US Open. The days of the dynasties where we had guys win multiple US Opens, we seem to be in one of those valleys where it's a different winner every year. Tiger Woods, 3 wins, right? Only guys with 4 wins, it's really a who's who. You've got Bobby Jones, you've got Ben Hogan, you've got Jack Nicklaus, and you've got Willie Anderson. Hey, speaking of Willie Anderson, I'm wearing the Willie Anderson shirt. What a crazy coincidence. Thanks to my friends at Holderness and Bourne. I like everything about the shirt. They're simple, they get the job done, they're good base layers. You can wear a vest over it, you can wear a sweater over it. They hold up well in the wash. I just think they look good too. I mean, there's something to be said for a nice, simple, classy shirt. This one's in white. They got the blues, fits right in, I think, with US Open style. I did the laundry in this house. They launder well, that's important. And so thanks to Holderness and Bourne for sponsoring the podcast. Try out their shirts, really. Go buy one. Take a chance. They're in all the finest pro shops. They're priced well for the value. And Holderness and Bourne, makers of good golf shirts. There you go. Something else that helps the US Open stand apart, it's not just a showcase for the best players in the game, it's also a showcase for the best golf courses that the United States has to offer. This is the creme de la creme. There's been 121 US Opens that have been played at 52 different sites. Among the ones that have been promised future US Opens where we know the Open's going to go back to, Shinnecock has hosted a US Open 127 years ago. It's still relevant today. The Country Club in Brookline, they hosted their first one 110 years ago. We're still using them today. Oakland Hills, 99 years ago. Wingfoot, 94 years ago. Oakmont, 96 years ago. Marion in Philadelphia, 89 years ago. Even the 2 youngsters among the Open Rota, Pebble, they hosted their first one 51 years ago, but they've already had 6 of them. And Pinehurst, kind of hard to believe they only hosted their first one 24 years ago, but they've already had 3. And they're scheduled to have 5 more over the next 24 years. So that brings us to why I am so excited about this year's US Open, because everything I just told you, forget about that. We got a brand new venue. It's never been played there before. We got one of the great cities in America. They haven't had a tournament in 75 years. For all of the great golf courses that the USGA has played their main US Open championship on, there was one left on their wish list, and finally this year we're gonna get it. Why do West Coast sites matter? Well, there's a lot of people that live on the West Coast for one thing. thing. But besides that, playing the championships on the West Coast also means later broadcast windows. It means higher TV ratings. It means more money from television. And that's important to the USGA. The US Open is the only event they hold that consistently makes money year after year after year. And so it's important that they cash in on this one, and finding another viable site on the West Coast where they could A, make sure they're testing the best players in the world, but B, get those TV ratings was important to them. LACC was always the one that they wanted. For years, for decades, this is the one they've had their eye on it, and finally this year, we're gonna see what all the hubbubaloo is about. But there are only so many locations that can host a modern US Open. You know, you've got all the television compound stuff, you've got all the security, you've got all the merchandise tents, you've got spectators, you gotta have the big grandstands, and you gotta have a golf course that can test the best 156 players in the world distance-wise. Everything that they needed for their dream US Open was sitting there. There was one place that was capable of doing it, and it was the one place that really didn't have much interest in doing it. So it's only this year, after more than 75 years of flirting, that the USGA and the LACC are finally gonna hook up and get it on. This is the city of Los Angeles at the end of the 19th century. Only about 50,000 people lived there in 1890, but by 1897, that number had doubled. 1897 was the year the first car arrived in Los Angeles, and it was in 1897 that this man, Edward Tufts, was taught to play golf out in Santa Monica by a group of visiting Englishmen. Tufts sold sporting goods equipment by trade, so it was either strategic or fortuitous that he was an early convert to the game of golf. By December of 1897, Tufts and some friends were laying out a course of their own back in Los Angeles, here at the corner of Pico and Alvarado Street. Their rudimentary 9-hole course, complete with sand greens and tomato cans for cups, became known as the Windmill Links. The name came from an abandoned landmark windmill that they converted into their first clubhouse. The club was a hit from day one. Some of these photos, in fact, that you're looking at now are from opening day. In fact, Windmill was such a success that they quickly outgrew their space. By the following year, they'd already moved up Pico Street to what was known as the 16th Street Links, or the Convent Links, because their new course was laid out on land behind the convent adjacent to Rosedale Cemetery. They also formalized the club by filing articles of incorporation that same year in 1898 that changed their name to the Los Angeles Country Club. A new clubhouse was built, pictured here, and the club kept adding members. So many that the club would need to move again the following year. So 3 different locations in the first 3 years. This time they moved just a quarter of a mile up the street to Pico and Western. They even took their new clubhouse with them. Pico and Western had room for 18 holes. This was either the first or second 18-hole golf course west of Chicago when it opened in 1899. The golf course still had sand greens, but everything about the spot was more permanent and better. They had a paid greenskeeper, they had tournaments, the Southern California Golf Association had been organized by then. It was a success. Okay, so we've talked about where the Los Angeles Country Club used to play their golf, but we haven't really gotten to where they play their golf today, right? And that's this site right here, and that's because of this man right here, Joseph Sartori. Sartori was a member of the Los Angeles Country Club for 49 years. He was a lawyer turned banker. He was kind of Mr. Southern California Golf. He was the club president at LACC for 34 years. 1902, Sartori goes for his Sunday drive. He drives out to the Wolfskill Ranch, which was way on the outskirts of Los Angeles at the time. He falls in love with the property. He ends up taking an option on 320 acres of land, pays $150 an acre for what is now a pretty big chunk of Beverly Hills. Takes them a while to talk the rest of the club members into moving once again, but by 1911, they've got their new home. And as you can see, it's a doozy. They've got a clubhouse that's just an absolute palace. They've still got sand greens. They've got 7 holes that are south of Wilshire. It's kind of a makeshift course. They've even got a par 6. By 1918, the Los Angeles Country Club's ready to redo their golf course. This time they went 36 holes. They've decided that they're going to expand from 500 members to 900 members, and they want big boy golf to match their new location. They hire a guy named Herbert Fowler, 1921, who's traveling around offering advice on golf courses. Fowler is a famous English golf architect, but it's a local member, a new member of the club, as a matter of fact, named George C. Thomas, who's going to help them build Fowler's design. And this is in 1921. So you probably know George C. Thomas's name. First of all, the C stands for Clifford. He was a junior. The first George Clifford Thomas made the family fortune. He was a partner at Drexel. His son, George Jr., he was part of the Philadelphia School of Architecture, and they got to see firsthand guys like George Crump, A.W. Tillinghast, exchanged ideas with him. Thomas would have seen the construction of Pine Valley and all the various architects that visited and gave their thoughts on the construction of Pine Valley. Then in 1927, 1928, somewhere in there, George Thomas is given the go-ahead to redesign the North course. He brings in Billy Bell once again. They've worked together. Bell's kind of the construction foreman. Bell Jr. eventually got involved, and actually Bell's wife knew quite a bit about golf architecture as well. So until the last decade or so, Los Angeles Country Club had a well-earned reputation for snobbiness, for exclusivity. They kind of turned their back on the outside world, and they just wanted to have their club with their people behind their gates. But it wasn't always like that. After the Thomas course was built, LACC hosted LA Opens, which were a big deal, PGA Tour events, 1926, 1934, 1935, 1936, 1940. 1930, they hold a women's amateur for the USGA. Glenna Coletta-Vare defeats Virginia Van Wee 6-5, and really all the way up until 1954. They hold a USGA Junior Amateur in 1954. Two local kids, Foster Bud Bradley defeats Al Geiberger 3-1, but then that's it. LACC was scheduled to hold the 1958 US Amateur. That's rescheduled, removed to Olympic Club down in San Francisco. And that's about it for public golf at the Los Angeles Country Club for almost 40 years. They seem to embrace this whole idea that exclusivity is better, and it's maybe better for some of those members, but for the golf world, it was really a loss. And it's one we're still recovering from today, and happy to have them back kind of in the public sphere of holding major championship golf courses and showing off their fantastic golf course. As late as 1986, there are rumors that the club may be interested in the US Open. It goes to a vote of the board of directors. It gets refused by a vote of 5-4. What changes? Well, it's hard to say. It's probably a combination of factors, but we do know this. Across town, right around the same time, is a young man growing up named Jeff Shackelford. Jeff is the son of former UCLA star Lynn Shackelford. Shackelford ends up playing for the UCLA Bruins during their championship teams, wins 3 consecutive national championships. He plays for the Lakers. He becomes an announcer for the Lakers. Meanwhile, Shaq, who we know and love today, is across the street, or down the street, playing at the Riviera Country Club. Shaq's a junior member of the Riviera Country Club when he's 16 years old. In 1995, Shaq writes the history of the Riviera Country Club, starts to bring back the whole history of who George Thomas is and why he's important, together with some other guys at the same time, Tommy Nacarito and some others that were involved in the early stages, the predecessors, I guess, of Golf Club Atlas. And then Shaq really writes a masterpiece, The Captain by Jeff Shackelford, which is really a biography of George C. Thomas and his architecture, but it's also kind of a book report on George Thomas's own book, which is Golf Architecture in America, which is really one of the standards of golf architecture writing. If you're gonna buy a book inspired by any of this at all, this is a great book. They're relatively expensive for first editions, but you can get reprints. But I like Shackelford's book just as good. It really almost as much as the original Golf Architecture in America. So both of these great books. Shaq gets invited over to LACC. He's got some friends there. They start having conversations with their new, with Kirk Reeks, who's the general manager of LACC at the time. And they decide that, it's worth trying to sell to the members the idea that what they've got in their George Thomas golf course is really, a pretty special thing, and it needs to be preserved, and it really needs to be restored. So by the mid-2000s, we know that Reese and Shackelford are working with the members to try to stir some interest up. It's gaining a foothold. That precedes the arrival of Gil Hanse. Gil Hanse is hired somewhere in 2006, 2007 to start work. And Gil Hanse and his crews, along with Tommy Nacarito, along with Jeff Shackelford, they begin this fantastic bunker project. Bunkers are restored 2009, 2010. At the same time, kind of on the political side, there's some thoughts, some new excitement around the membership in the golf course of, naturally showing it off. That takes the form of the 2017 Walker Cup. It's a huge hit, and around that time, it's announced that they're going to go for the brass ring. They're going to host the 2023 U.S. Open, which brings us to this week. It's finally here. I think it's just the perfect combination of a kind of an old school course with a golden age design, but it's also one that's fresh that we as the viewers haven't seen. I can't wait to see it. And thanks for listening to Office Hours.